more than 3 decades, Troy Harrison has helped B2B companies build stronger sales organizations, improve performance, and navigate today's buying environment. Troy is a featured speaker for Vistage Worldwide and author of Sell It Like You Mean It and The Pocket Sales Manager. With 15 years in frontline sales and sales management before he began teaching others, he founded the Sales Navigator in 2004 and has worked with hundreds of B2B companies in 23 countries. He's known as the Sales Navigator. Please join me in welcoming Troy Harrison.
And welcome to the second Navigator's Chart Series webinar. It's not your pipeline, who your buyers are, where they live, and how they actually buy. And what we're going to talk about today is the most fundamental issue that anyone building a sales organization needs to know. And I'll also tell you, it's probably the least sexy because it's the one that most people don't want to talk about. But we've got to talk about it because if we don't, nothing else you do in building your sales program is going to be right. Let me explain what I mean. I have seen the same issues with sales programs for over 20 years. I've been in sales since 1990. I've been the Sales Navigator since 2004, and I've been working primarily with B2B companies on building sales organizations for over 20 years now. And what I have discovered is that if you're going to build a successful sales organization, you have to do so in 4 layers. And here's what those layers are. The first layer that determines the performance of your sales organization is the waters. And by the way, you'll notice that this is structured so that each layer builds on the last layer. So I'll explain what I mean. The waters, which is what we're going to talk about today, that is your selling environment. And I decided to take the Navigator motif and make it into an analogy for this because what we're trying to do is complete a journey to sales success. We want to have a sales program that sells profitably, consistently, predictably, and grows our company's profits. To do that, to complete that journey, you've got to do so in 4 layers. And it's just like completing a successful journey across the waters. Well, first of all, you've got to understand your waters. That is who your buyers are, how they process information, how they buy things, how they look at and what they need from salespeople. That's our most basic layer. If you get that wrong, nothing else is going to be right. If you try and take a lake boat out on the ocean, you're going to have problems. I don't care how good everything else you've done is. Same thing with building a sales organization. The second layer that sits on top of the waters is the vessel. The vessel is your sales structure. That's your company, that's your offer, your products, your services. But most importantly for the sales conversation, it's about your processes, your metrics, your compensation schedule, all of that sales infrastructure that goes into building your sales organization, because basically your salespeople are operating the vessel. Just like a journey across the water, you got to have the right vessel for the waters. And then on top of that, you've got to have the right crew to operate that vessel. So your crew has to be tuned in with the waters, and your crew has to be one that will work with the sales infrastructure that you have. And not all salespeople are built the same. Not all salespeople are built for similar structures. And so you've got to have all of these things working together. And then finally, once you've got the crew in place, once you've got them operating the right vessel for the right waters, then you've got to have the route. That's your sales process. That's your path to revenue. And when you build a sales organization, you do so in these 4 layers in this intentional order. Now, last month, I covered the overview of the Navigator's chart in a webinar. If you haven't seen that, go to my YouTube channel at Troy Harrison, the Sales Navigator. You can find it and you can watch it because it's a good overview, gives you a lot of information, and it'll tell you where we're going to go next. But today, what we're going to talk about is the waters. We'll be covering the other 3 layers of the Navigator's chart in upcoming months. So, here's why this exists. When sales results slip, when your funnel tightens up, when we have a bad quarter or a bad year, most of the time your sales leader, whether that is the president, CEO, owner, VP of sales, whoever, the first thing they look at is the team. They sit there and go and they go, okay, do I have the right salespeople and are they doing the right things? And when times of stress, what companies do is they do the T&T. They turn salespeople and they train salespeople. That's when I get phone calls. And they say, Troy, can you train my salespeople? Or in some cases, Troy, I need to change salespeople out. I need to turn some salespeople. And that's what they do. But the problem is they never look at layer one, which is, are our salespeople doing the right thing for our waters? Are we sailing the right waters? Are we fishing the right waters? A lot of times that's not the case. As a matter of fact, most people's waters have changed more in the last 5 years than in the previous 100. We are in a time of radical change in selling. And I got to be honest, it's fun because it's intellectually challenging, but it is challenging. So what happens? Well, I'll give you an example. I got a call from a guy. It's been over a month ago now, and he called me up. I've known him. We've attended some of the same conventions, but he's seen my webinars and stuff. And he called me up and he said, "Hey, Troy." He said, can you come down? He's in Atlanta. He said, can you come down to Atlanta and do a half-a-day training on prospecting for my salespeople? Because I think they're failing at prospecting. I said, okay, tell me what you mean. What's going on? He said, well, they're not getting appointments like they used to. We require 5 appointments a week, and then a lot of weeks they're only getting 1 or 2 or 3 appointments. And I said, okay, same people? Yeah, for the most part, they're the same people as he had 3 to 4 years ago when he was having those appointments happen. Okay, that's a data point. And I said, do you have any metrics around this? Yes. He said, we require salespeople to do 20 phone calls a day. And those 20 phone calls should yield 1 appointment per day. There's our 5 appointments per week. Great. So I said, well, tell me what you're seeing. Have you gone into CRM and looked, or are they just not making the 20 calls? And I could hear keys clicking in the background. So I know what he's doing. He says, okay. He says, okay, this is pretty consistent. He said, they're making their 20 calls. Some of them are getting more than 20 calls. But he said, nowadays, all they're doing is leaving messages. They're not talking to people. I said, okay. Here's what he's not recognizing. His waters have changed. His customer behavior has changed. And this is consistent. This is something most salespeople are seeing. And that is very simple. People pick up the phone less now than they used to. Up until about 10 years ago, if you sat down and we'll take that 20 calls per day metric, most salespeople could do 20 good dials in an hour working off of a good database. You would probably talk to about 1 out of every 3rd or 4th person that you called. And when I say talk to a person, I don't mean the receptionist. I mean talk to the actual decision maker or influencer that you're trying to get a hold of. It's a pretty cool time. And if a salesperson if you had the database right, and if the salesperson was saying the right things on that call, you're probably getting an appointment about every 3rd call. So roughly about 1 out of 10 calls, or in his case, he was building a margin 1 out of 20, you were going to get an appointment. Here's what's changed. Contact ratios for a lot of businesses nowadays have slipped from 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 10. That's not sales training. That's buyer behavior. And so I explained to him, I said, look, I'd be happy to come down and do a half-a-day sales training for you. I'm never shy about accepting engagements from clients, but I said, your real problem is your buyer behavior. There's no sales training you can do that will help your salespeople change an entire generation of buyer behavior to pick up the phone when they see it ringing, as opposed to just letting it ring. Because people nowadays are attuned to not picking up the phone when somebody calls. I still do because of my business, except when it's that spam risk guy. That guy calls me all the time. I get really tired of him. But actually, those calls are a big driving force for that buyer behavior because people are used to spam calls. I said, here's what we should do. And I suggested we do a consulting project to figure out what his buyer behavior was and then retool his vessel, his metrics, and his route to figure out how to get his salespeople to do some sort of outreach that will yield appointments, find out where his buyers are. Essentially, do the things we're going to talk about in today's webinar. He says, well, okay, give me a couple of days and I'll consider what we want to do. He called me back in a couple of days. He says, well, he said, I had a meeting with my salespeople yesterday and I told them that if they don't work harder, they're going to get fired. Okay, even I don't win them all. And that, by the way, you see part 3 of this slide, push harder. That's what he did. He simply said, okay, what we're doing isn't working. I have evidence and documentation that it's not working. So what I want you to do and what I want you to do is to do more of what working. His waters have changed and he's not wanting to adapt to the waters. That's a shame. I'll probably hear from him again in a few months because that's how that kind of thing normally works. But if all you're doing, if you are having sales problems and you're not looking first at layer 1, has our buyer behavior changed? You're probably not going to get the right result. Changing salespeople, changing your training isn't necessarily going to get you where you need to go, and pushing harder sure as hell won't get you where you need to go. So, we're going to go into 3 questions today that are going to diagnose what your waters are. If I'm going to give you some broad brush statements about who today's buyer is and who today's B2B buyer, what they look like, how they act, but that is broad brush. I would encourage you to do some deep dives into your own customer base and your own successes to verify and validate that or tweak it for your own market. So the who are your buyers right now? Your buyers, we have had shifts in sales that have been generational, technological, and cultural, and all of those have affected buyer behavior. Your buyer right now is probably younger than you think they are, and they're definitely a hell of a lot more tech savvy and informed and empowered than you think they are. Where do they live and learn? I don't mean geographically. What I mean is, where do they go to find out information and get influence on their decisions? And in doing research for this webinar, I'm going to be very honest with you. There's one channel that I need to learn more about, and I'm going to tell you what it is when we get there. But again, that's buyer behavior. How are they acquiring information? And then finally, how do they buy in 2026? What does their buyer's journey look like? And what moves it forward or what kills it? So those are the 3 things we're going to be spending time on this morning. So thank you for being on here. You're going to enjoy this. First of all, your buyer, they're younger than you think they are. They're a hell of a lot more skeptical, and they're more empowered. I've always said that the buyer is the star of the show when it comes to sales. Salespeople for years and years have flattered themselves to think that we are the stars of the sales show. We're not. We never were. But there have always been a lot of methodologies out there that taught that we really were. And most sales methodologies that are popular right now, other than mine, have been written for a world where there was a huge information imbalance. For the first 15 years of my sales career, if customers wanted to find out about the stuff that I had to sell, my products, my services, my company, basically they had to go to me for that. There were no independent validation sources that were readily available at their fingertips. And so customers relied on salespeople for information, not just about insights about how to solve their problems, but actually products and services. You could present a product. When I was selling industrial bearings, I could hold up a pillow block bearing and I could explain all the features and benefits. And now if you try to do that, they're going to take one of these things, do 3 taps on their smartphone, and they're going to have it. So, and you kind of look like an ass sitting there doing it. So what they want from us is completely different. But when you look at the major sales methodologies out there, they were all written for a world where that information imbalance was intact, where the bias and the information advantage was on the salesperson's side. Sandler Selling, written in 1967, Spin Selling, Neil Rackham, 1988, Jeffrey Gitomer's Sales Bible, 1994. Even the Challenger Sale, which is probably the most modern of the big sales methodologies, was written in 2010, but it was written on research from the 1990s. And that was, we had the internet in the 1990s, but it hadn't really started dictating buyer behavior the way it does now. So our buyers have changed. And the truth is, they don't need salespeople the way that they used to. And you'll notice, by the way, I didn't say your buyer doesn't need you. They don't need you the way they used to, because buyers nowadays, we'll use the waters analogy again, they're drowning in information. They're up to their asses in information about what they could buy, how they could buy it, what the features and benefits are, what the attributes of it are, and theoretically how it matches up to their needs. There was a Gartner survey last year that surveyed business to business buyers, and they said their most recent purchase was very complex or difficult. The reason for that is buyers have access to so many more vendors. And here's a stat that was also in that Gartner survey, is that most B2B buyers say that they complete 70 to 83% of their research before they ever talk to a salesperson. Think about that for a moment. Even 10 years ago, if buyers needed something, a lot of times one of their first calls, maybe not necessarily their first call, but one of their first calls was going to be to a salesperson who sold that stuff. And nowadays it's not. Nowadays they've got stuff. What they need is insight on how to use that stuff. You can use AI now. I don't know if you use AI or not. I use Claude. And I use Claude literally every day in my business. Claude is a great research tool. It's a great copy editor. Claude helps, and I've always been really good with spelling and grammar, but still, Claude helps me make things make sense. I actually did a webinar a couple of months ago, and again, this was on my YouTube channel, demoing Claude and Perplexity for actually doing prospect research. And I did a live demo because I was going to Chicago to do a seminar for a Vistage group, and for the purpose of the webinar, I said, hey, Claude, find me 5 CEOs on my ideal client profile and look for triggers that would make good reasons for these people to want to talk to me to help them build their sales team. I was just doing this for a demo. And I did it live. I didn't do it on Claude. I did it on Perplexity. Make that clear. I did it live and in person. And Perplexity gave me 5, and 2 of them were so good that I called of them. One of them right now, I think I'm going to start working with next month. So that was a demo that actually is going to turn into a client. So I'm pretty happy about it. But you can go to your AI tool right now, whether it's Claude, whether it's Chat, whether it's Perplexity, and say, I'm looking to solve this problem and buy this thing. Can you find me 3 or 4 vendors to do it? I was having a problem. I just bought an '89 Ford F-250 a few days ago. Was having a problem with the starter when it got hot, and I thought that the starter was heat soaking, which is a common problem. You don't need to know what that is, but Claude actually went online, validated the heat soak, and said, yes, here's the fix, and here's the parts you need for it. The parts are going to be here tomorrow. And I've actually done this several times with auto repair issues on Claude, and it's been flawless every time. Here's the thing, though. There's a trust barrier because today's buyer is very skeptical of salespeople and very skeptical of things that salespeople say. They're going to accept a Google review before they're going to accept what you say. That's a huge shift from the way sales was even 10 years ago. We have to learn to adapt to that. We have to be somebody that the buyers need. And here's a stat that always kind of shakes people up a little bit. In the B2B world, 71% of those people with buying authority are either millennials or Generation Z. And that number was 64% in 2022. Obviously, this is aging in very quickly. And that has a lot of implications for the way that we sell. You know, the model to sell to boomers and most Generation X's, this shift, I think, started with Generation X. But the model to sell to those people was you'd walk in, you'd look for some clues to what they're into personally. You would form a relationship with them based on personal connections, and that got you the right and the entree to talk about business with them. Then you could transition that to them buying from you. Millennials are completely the opposite. When you approach a millennial, you need to be focused on, okay, here's how I can help you do business better. The thing with a millennial is if you become somebody that is a valued vendor, if you help them solve their business problems, then that reverses, it flips on you, and all of a sudden you become somebody that they want to get to know personally. Then you become somebody that they're going to go out and have lunch with and have a drink with and form that relationship with. Here's something else, and this is from a LinkedIn B2B buyer report, and this shocked me. 41% millennials make B2B decisions faster than boomers. Now, if you're trying to accelerate a sales cycle, that's pretty cool. And part of the reason is, of course, that they're drawing information from other people than you. 45% of buyers used AI tools during their last purchase. What that means is, and one implication for you is, you should be using AI to research your own company and your own offerings. If you don't have an ongoing chat going on whatever platform you use, and you're not directing that platform on at least a weekly basis, okay, go out and research my company, see what you can find, research me like you were a customer, tell me what you're finding, give me a competitive analysis. If you're not refreshing that at least weekly, you're falling behind, because I guarantee you, your customers are. Now, here's a stat that I'm not 100% sure at. 67 to 75% of buyers now prefer a rep-free experience. I put that in there because it does matter. I think my opinion is this. I think those 67 to 75% of buyers have probably dealt with salespeople who are selling on old models that didn't respect the new way that they buy things. My opinion is that if you sell based on the way today's buyer likes to buy, you're probably not going to fall victim to that. And by the way, think about that 71% stat. What that means is that if you have a sales process designed around selling to boomers or Gen X's, you're selling to 29% of the market. Here's where it gets crazier. A lot of those boomers and Gen X's have looked at the way millennials do things and thought, that's pretty cool. That's a hell of a lot more efficient. I think I'm going to start buying that away. So you can't even stereotype and walk in and say, okay, I'm selling to somebody in their early 60s. They're going to buy as a boomer. They're going to buy as a Gen X. They might be sitting across from you thinking like a millennial. Again, that makes it a challenging time. My advice is build everything around the waters being the younger, more empowered buyers, because A, you're going to be right 3/4 of the time at least, and B, that's going to grow as the years go on, because again, this is going to age in. Millennials aren't going to start buying like boomers. Some boomers are buying like millennials. Millennials aren't going to start buying like boomers. So keep these stats in mind. That's who your buyers are nowadays. Think about the way that buyers did things in 2023. They came to vendors for information. They trusted us as a primary source. And I think that was probably lessening a little bit by 2023, but it was still in place. And they answered the phone when people called. Nowadays, they're peer influence. They research independently. They validate and research with AI tools, with peer reviews. They go to online communities. We're going to talk about some of those communities in a moment. And they're skeptical of you. That also means, by the way, that any sales tactic that you have that is based on vagueness or a lack of transparency is probably one you should retire. I've always said you can either embrace transparency or you can have it forced upon you. When today's buyer sees your salespeople being less than transparent, they're probably going to discount that salesperson, and you violate their trust once, you're probably not going to get it back. So where do they go? Keep in mind, most of the buyer's journey is happening before we ever see the buyer. It's a little bit different than it used to be. They're doing a lot of stuff in the background before they ever see us. By the way, this does presume that we are in a sales model where the buyer has reached out to you to initiate their buyer's journey. It is still possible for outreach to initiate a buyer's journey. I don't want to discount that. But even if we reach out and connect with them, let's say one of your salespeople manages to get an appointment today for next Tuesday, I can guarantee you By next Tuesday, that buyer is going to have completed a lot of this same type of research that we're talking about, even if they weren't the ones who came first. So where do they go? Well, B2B buyers are telling Gartner that only 17% of the time they invest in purchasing things is spent with a salesperson. I'm going to say that 10 years ago, that was probably at least 2/3 of the purchase time was spent with salespeople. So that's huge, and that has a lot of implications for us. That doesn't mean they're spending more time overall on the purchase. What it means is that we are getting a smaller chunk of the pie. Where do they go? Well, independent online research has still that's probably the biggest overall piece. Meeting with buying group, if they have a buying group, independent research, and again, meeting with suppliers is small. And here's the thing that's really scary. If it's not a single vendor purchase, in other words, if they're looking at a few different solutions, take that 17%, break it out by however many vendors there are in there. What that means is your salespeople have to be much more effective and time efficient with the time they get with buyers. And I'm going to call this, by the way, the Zoom effect. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. We all know what happened in 2020. I'm not going to recover that. But one side effect was we saw a trend that had already been happening, which is buyers spending less time face-to-face in person with salespeople and more time in front of a video screen. 2020 was the best thing that ever happened to Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all of that. But a video screen compresses a sales call. You find out that you get more accomplished in 30 minutes on a video call than you did in an hour on a face-to-face meeting. I don't know exactly why that is, but I think the video screen tends to make people drive to the point a little bit more. And so what's happening is that even when you are getting those face-to-face sales calls now, those are almost running on a Zoom agenda. They're compressed. They're more to the point. They're going to want salespeople in and out of there in a half hour where they might have granted an hour before, but they expect the same qualitative discussion to happen. And that's okay. I mean, a lot of the fluff that salespeople used to do is just kind of sailed out the window. Nobody is going to schedule an appointment to talk about football for a half hour nowadays. They want a business-focused conversation. So that means that when you're plotting with your salespeople about how to sell and how to make the most out of that sales call time, what you need to be doing is figuring out with them what are the most impactful questions we can ask, what are the most impactful pieces of insight that we can give our customer. You don't have to script out the whole sales call, obviously, for reasons I'll explain shortly, but it does work. And a lot of the basic questions, the what do you do here type of questions, those are gone. Your buyer expects you to have your act together before you ever walk in on that, and be prepared to talk about their problem. And when you do ask questions about their business, they better be insightful. One of my favorite questions to ask has always been, so why do your customers buy from you? You get to hear everything that your customer thinks is great about their company and how it communicates value. And a lot of times you'll find commonalities between your own offerings and their offerings, and that does create a good point where you can give some insights on, okay, here's how we can add to that. So, but make those questions impactful, because be aware, the salesperson, I actually saw this live and in person last year. Local client asked me to go out and make sales calls with a particular salesperson, and I've known this salesperson for a long time. He's older than I am. He's very much, he's kind of a salesperson that I call a good time Charlie. Great guy to hang out with, loads of fun, probably not the best product guy, doesn't ask great questions, he's a hang out and have a good time guy. And for years and years, people bought from him because of that. And he's been struggling in the last couple of years. So they asked me to go out with him. So we went into this company where we're calling on an office manager. And she was, I'm going to say, early 30s. I'm not the greatest judge of age, but We'll go with early 30s. Definitely, her age definitely didn't start with a 4. And so we sit down, and it was after, a Chiefs game. And for those of you who don't know, Chiefs are like a religion in Kansas City. Not my religion, but a religion. And he starts talking, and he walks in, and he sees pictures of Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and all that up on our walls, and he is off to the races, man. He's talking football, and boy, what a hell of a game, and did you see this play in the third quarter and all that kind of stuff? And she's kind of going, uh-huh, yeah, uh-huh. And then at 5 minutes, she says, gentlemen, your time's up. He goes, well, I thought we scheduled a half an hour. She said, we did, but we scheduled a half an hour to talk business. You're wasting my time. And he says, oh, no, that's okay. And she said, no. She said, you've already wasted my time, and I'm not going to let you waste any more. And we were gone. And she wasn't rude about it, but she was protecting her time. And we sat down in the car, and he said, what the hell happened in there? I said, well, what the hell happened is probably something that's been happening. I said, you're going in and wanting to talk non-business with people who have you there to talk business, and it just doesn't work anymore. So when you're preparing your salespeople for sales calls, think about that. Here's what's scarier. A lot of times, the decision on the part of the buyer is happening someplace where you aren't. And that'll make you nervous. Because where we tend to be, where most people are, trade shows and industry events. By the way, I still encourage trade shows, but there's got to be a different mentality about that. And I may even do a webinar on that after we finish the Navigator's chart, because by that time we'll be heading into trade show season. I've had some really illuminating discussions with people on how to make trade shows work. Cold outbound and prospecting, yes, we still have to do it, but we have to do it smarter in a different way now than we used to. Paid search, displayed ads, referrals, none of those things are bad in and of itself, but the question is, are they where your buyers actually live? Do you know there are Slack groups out there that are there as private communities in different industries, in different professions, where they are discussing things that you might be selling and you're not allowed in the door? That's kind of spooky. LinkedIn. You're going to see a lot of that kind of conversation on LinkedIn. Here's the one that I haven't done much with. Shame on me, Troy. And who knows, maybe we'll update that in a future webinar, but I have done very, very little with Reddit. And I think it's long past time for me to get involved and figure out Reddit and start seeing some of these discussions, because I see I have Claude doing research for me on various sales issues, and Claude a lot of times will point me towards a Reddit forum or a Reddit discussion topic. And I've just got to start spending some time getting involved in that. Review sites, also big. Google reviews, podcasts, newsletters, back channel calls, all of these things, you got to understand. Think of all of those things as a big building or a big room within a building where you walk up to the door and it's locked. Yeah, you're not locked out of LinkedIn and Reddit, but you are locked out of those peer Slack groups. Those rooms aren't about you. Some of them you can be a part of, and I would encourage you, just like I'm going to, start looking for LinkedIn posts, look for some of those groups, look for Reddit groups, figure out how to be there. Now, I also encourage you, don't go in like a charging rhinoceros and start trying to sell everyone in that group. Instead, be there, be part of the discussions, sometimes it's okay to read an entire discussion and never say a word about it. I have a problem with that, but maybe you don't. But see what people are saying about the things that you're buying, and more important, about the issues that they're trying to solve. Be present in the room, but don't make the room about you. And at some point, there may be a point where you say, you know what, let's have a call. That's perfectly okay. But you need to understand what's happening in these places. Look at LinkedIn posts. Look at A lot of industry associations have groups on LinkedIn, and most of those groups have been absolutely ruined. The association starts a group because what they want to do is they want to have an opportunity for their members to converse with each other about industry issues. And then salespeople go in and they take over the group because they post spam within the group. And it sucks. I mean, it really harms the value of those groups for them and for everybody else. And when you see an industry group that is dead except for sales posts, you know what happened is the salesperson take it over. My encouragement is don't be that salesperson. Instead, be somebody who is there participate in the discussion, but don't make it about you. If you find a good industry group, be a part of it, but don't kill it. So we've talked about the who. We've talked about the where. These are two important parts of your waters. How. And no, that's not the Indians. Hello. How is also important because we used to drive sales processes. Matter of fact, that's what most sales methodologies are about. Here's our sales process. I'm going to stuff my customers into it. I'm going to ram them all the way through it. And I'm going to push you out the other end, hopefully having bought someone. We can't do that anymore. The buyer, and you'll notice I refer to sales processes very little nowadays. Everything I do and everything I talk about now is about the buyer's journey because talking about the buyer's journey puts the buyer at the center of it. And again, sales processes were built for a time when we controlled the flow of information. We controlled, we never controlled the customer, even though salespeople have flattered themselves that they always did. But we controlled the information that the customer got from us, and we could do so knowing that other than our competitors, there weren't a hell of a lot of other ways for them to get information about us. So we don't drive those things anymore, and we have to adapt. That's why I've come up with, that's why I center everything around the buyer's journey. I'm going to tell you about the buyer's journey a little bit. The buyer's journey is the 5 stages that our buyer moves through, whether we guide them or not. Every purchase, from the purchase of a cheeseburger to the purchase of a $40 million building, goes through these 5 stages. And this is my definition. It's not the marketing definition. Step 1 is motivation. Motivation is they feel a dissatisfaction. Something's wrong. We need to do something. And by the way, it doesn't necessarily have to be something wrong. It could also be, okay, something's right, but it's not as right as it could be. They have a dissatisfaction with the status quo, and they feel like there's a different place that they could get to, a desired future state. That's what gets people into the buyer's journey. Now, motivation could come in different ways. Could come from an advertisement. It could come from internal changes. We'll talk about that momentarily. Or, it could come from a sales message. From motivation, they go to investigation. Okay, what's the problem that we are really trying to solve? That is the stage where salespeople can get involved, ask questions, help the customer define success. And understand, they're also going to do their own investigation outside of us. So if we can provide insightful questioning that gets them to a place that they can't go independently, now we're adding value to the buyer's journey. Now we gain influence. We don't gain control, we gain influence. But we help the buyer figure out what are we really trying to solve. From investigation, and I'll say this too, 80% of your chance to win or lose a sale happens in investigation. It's the most critical stage. If you have to pick one phase of the buyer's journey to emphasize in your training, pick investigation, make your salespeople the best questioners they could possibly be. Then we go to step 3, solution. Now that we know what our itch is, what's going to scratch it? Okay. What approach is going to fix our problem? That's where the salespeople have the opportunity to present our products and services, fit them up to the needs of the customer. Step 4 is evaluation. Evaluation is price terms. Can I afford it? When can I get it? Does it represent good value? And step 5 is decision. Do we move forward? Do we not move forward? Those 5 steps, your buyer is going to move through those 5 steps on every purchase they make from you, whether you guide them or not. Now, our the good salespeople help our customers navigate the buyer's journey. And they understand this by understanding what shapes the buy. So what initiates a buy? What are the key motivators? Motivators could be a leadership change. It could be something bad happens, system goes down. It could be a priority shift, regulatory shift. We want to grow. We've started losing competitively. We need to know as salespeople what the motivator or what is driving this buyer to go through this process. And that we won't always know that in the motivation phase, but we should know it by the end of the investigation phase. What says that they're real? What distinguishes researchers from buyers, or as we used to call them in the car business many years ago, only did that for 2 years, tire kickers. That is their ability to state the problem and their definition of success. If you are asking your prospects questions about what is your definition of success, and they don't have an answer for you, you probably don't have a real buyer. And then what's going to kill the deal? A lot of times analysis paralysis kills the deal. They get so much information. And here's something you need to recognize. And this is one of the hardest things for salespeople to recognize. Your toughest competitor is not other companies who sell the same stuff that you do. Your toughest competitor is, was, and always will be the status quo. Your toughest competitor is the buyer's ability to do nothing and make no changes. Okay, and the buyer always has the ability to do that. Status quo is always the safest decision to make. It's very easy. All you just, okay, not right now. How many times have we heard that? We have to be, when we present, when we find the motivating forces, when we present our solutions, when we go through the evaluation phase, we have to prove that we are a great enough benefit over the status quo to overcome the customer's fear of being wrong. Fear of being wrong can outweigh the hope of being right. And if you get all the way down to decision phase and their fear of being wrong is outweighing the hope of being right, you're not going to get that business. So, but understand, all of these are buyer-centric. They're not sales-centric. The days when we could just push a deal through and close people until they bled from the ears and get a deal done, they're really past. Customers have a lot more freedom, and they understand that they have a lot more freedom to exit their buyer's journey at any time. So I'm going to ask you some questions here to do a self-diagnosis. Are you sailing the wrong waters? Well, your win rates are going down, but your activity is going up. Think about the guy who was trying to get his salespeople to set an appointment. Here's a key one. Your best reps are struggling just like your weakest reps. That, by the way, that doesn't mean that your best reps aren't still the best reps. It just means they're not performing as well as they used to, nor are your middle and lower. That means you got a waters problem. Sales cycles are stretching out and nobody can really define the cause. That's waters. Deals stall at the same place, you can't tell why. Your forecasts keep slipping. You're hearing interesting and not now. All of those tend to be waters issues rather than vessel, crew, or route. You need to make sure that the way you're selling is in tune with the way your buyers want to buy. That is your waters. If you're getting if two or three of those are answered by yes, you've got a waters problem. So where do you start? I'm going to give you a little marching list now. I'm going to give you a marching list, then we're going to have time for some Q&A, and then I'm going to have some final remarks to sum it up. So hang on. First of all, look at your last 10 won deals that you got and look at the buyer profile. Are they buying the way that you have your buyer profile set up, or are they buying a different way? Are they a different generation? Identify what stage of the journey every open opportunity is. Most companies don't map their CRM or their processes by the buyer's journey. I strongly encourage you, retool everything around these 5 phases. Number 3, start getting present where your buyers are. Get involved in some communities. Pick 3. Don't go blow up and go everywhere. Pick three. Pick a Reddit group, pick a LinkedIn group, try and find a peer channel or a Slack group that you can be a part of, and just observe. Sit at the back room, watch what happens. And then everything in your pipeline, go back and see if you can identify a clear motivator for that purchase. And that motivator, by the way, I hear this from salespeople a lot. The motivator better, easy for me to say, I'm a professional speaker. The motivator had better be something other than, well, they really like us, or we've got great service. No platitudes. Find real motivators for every deal. And if you don't have a real motivator, a purchase probably isn't going to happen. Not just from you. A real motivator can be present and they buy from somebody else. If no real motivator is present, they're not going to buy from anybody. And that means they're just clogging up your CRM. They're clogging up your pipeline. So there's your marching list. Now, again, got a couple more things I'm going to tell you about next month's webinar. If you've got a question, please go ahead and put that in the chat box right now. And while I'm giving you time to do that, I'm going to go ahead and tell you about next month's webinar. Next month's webinar is entitled, It's Not Your Reps, the 5 Structural Flaws Quietly Killing Your Sales. It's going to be on Thursday, July 23rd at 11 a.m. Central. And that one is going to be on the vessel. We are going to go through the structure, the infrastructure of a sales program and show you how to build a successful sales infrastructure. We're going to talk about comp. We're going to talk about metrics. We're going to talk about your CRM and your tech stack. All of these things that go into building the infrastructure for a strong sales program. And I thank you very much for attending today. Hope you found this one helpful and successful. Like I said, the topic itself isn't sexy, but it's incredibly important. And I think one of the flaws in sales today is that salespeople and sales managers are looking for things that are sexy, and they're worried less about what works. But this is the basis for how you build a sales program. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this one to an end. I thank you very much for attending.